Well, hello, and welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast. Join me, Sam Harris, on my journey of curiosity and growth. I have conversations with some of the world's most fascinating humans, from billionaires to Olympians, and most everyone in between, such as suspiciously happy people and even a hitman. Success isn't just for successful people, it is earned, and you can earn it too. I find out how ordinary people become extraordinary to fuel your own growth mindset. Today, I am interviewing Spence Green, the founder and CEO of Lilt AI, which is a machine-assisted translation platform that helps businesses, agencies, and individuals optimize translation speed, quality, and cost. So I obviously talked to him about building an AI startup and how the hell one goes into doing these kinds of cool things, machine translation in the future and stuff. And so it's a bit of an interesting exploration of these topics, and I hope you enjoy it. Spence is a pretty cool guy, and I'm happy to have had a conversation with him. Okay, cool. Can you try and tell me your life story in 3 minutes?
I grew up in Atlanta. So I grew up in the South in the United States, which has a sort of distinct culture. And I think for that reason, I wasn't really exposed to language, or I didn't travel much when I was a kid. I didn't leave the country until I was 18, I think. London was the first place that I went, so not really an exotic place. And when I was growing up, I had two real interests in life. One was computers and the other was baseball. And I wanted to be a professional baseball player. And so, yeah, that's really all I did growing up, was sports and fiddling with my computer. And I ended up playing baseball my first year of college, but I hurt my back. And when I couldn't play anymore, then I just decided I was going to spend all my time on the other thing that I had that I really liked, which is computers. And so since then, I did my undergrad degree in computer science. And then after that, that's when I started to get interested in language. So I moved to the Middle East after grad school. I was working for the military, and I worked on an air base in the Middle East for about 2.5 years. And I learned Arabic. And it was right at that time that Google Translate came out. And I got really excited about machine translation, so building systems that can translate language automatically. And I left my job and I went to grad school in 2008 to start working on that. And that's really what I've done since. And it's been really exciting because it's coincided with this flourishing of machine learning systems coming into the world. So I think I was really blessed to kind of hit that right at the right time when this technology started to work. And now it's just like the most exciting time in the history of AI, since people have been trying to build these systems for 70 years now.
Cool. So that nicely leads into what it is that you are doing then with Lilt. If you could just explain what Lilt is doing.
Sure. What we build is a machine learning system that's purpose-built for translation. So when John and I, my co-founder, we started working together, I had been living in a country, I lived in the United Arab Emirates, and in that country, if you don't speak English, you make less money, which is counterintuitive in an Arabic-speaking country. And so in particular, one of the people that I spent the most time getting to know and learning Arabic from was one of the people who worked in the building that I lived in. He was like the watchman. And so I would sit at night with him and talk to him, because he's just sitting there and I'm just sitting there, and we'd just speak Arabic for like 4 hours a night. And I asked him one time, like, what did you do? He's a migrant worker, of course. I said, what did you do when you were in Egypt? And he said, well, I was an accountant. And I said, well, why aren't you an accountant here? And he said, because I don't speak English. And I said, but we're in an Arabic speaking country. And he said, I know, but you have to speak English to get a better job here. And this bothered me a lot. I hadn't, growing up as I did in a part of America where people only speak English and you never hear any other languages, I hadn't really kind of confronted that or sort of had any sense for what that life experience might be like. And that was right when Google Translate came out. So I got really excited about that, and went to grad school to start working on that. And in 2011, I was at Google working on Translate as an intern for my now co-founder. And I think we both had this strong interest in information access and making the world's information available to people. And we were specifically interested in books. Why don't more books get translated? And so that's when we started to learn about what's known as the language industry. So when you're a business and you want to translate something, you hire one of these companies from the language industry and they hire a bunch of freelancers. You give them the words and they hire these people and they translate the words and they give them back to you. And it's really slow and inefficient. And this is kind of the main reason why more stuff doesn't get translated, because it's really expensive. So we started to build systems to make that process more efficient. And that's what we do now. So we build the system that institutions these are businesses, governments, and academic institutions can use to publish information across language barriers and do that in a much more efficient way than just hiring bunches of people to do it.
Wow. Okay. Cool. That's a really nice introduction to the whole thing. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Yeah. How did you get the internship at Google then, firstly? So it's always a hot topic of how do people work for Google, and did you have a screening process and things?
Well, I had met John the year before at an academic conference. So in our field, we're in natural language processing, which is a subdiscipline of artificial intelligence, which is a subdiscipline of computer science. And when you're in graduate school, the sort of cadence of things is you spend most of the academic year doing research and writing papers. And then in the summer, there are conferences, research conferences where you present papers. And so the previous summer, I had met John at a conference and we had sort of shared interests. And so he had finished at Berkeley and was a research scientist at Google. And so he invited me to work with him the next year, which I thought was awesome because, just a couple of years before that, I had been just reading about Google Translate and I never thought I'd actually get to work on it. So for me, it was enormously exciting. And I think what we discovered over the summer is that we worked really, we had shared interest and we really enjoyed collaborating. And we both had a strong interest in information access and how people can interact with these systems to accomplish a task. And that's kind of a underexplored area of our research field, how people interact with language systems. It's more popular now with dialogue being so hot, sort of like Siri and Google Assistant, things like that, and Alexa. But at that time, there are very few people who are interested in how people interact with language systems. So that turned into my doctoral dissertation, and he was on my committee, and we wrote some papers together after that, and then we decided to start this company.
Cool. Okay, so what does Lilt actually deliver? Because you say information access, so you just make it easier for people to use tools like Translate? It's just to make it really obvious for people that are listening.
Sure. When a business wants to translate something, so let's say that they want to start selling in Japan, and so they need to translate their website and their marketing materials and their ads and their product documentation into Japanese. So typically what they do right now is there's like a boutique agency where they will send all this information to the agency. The agency will hire some people and they'll type it all out. They'll send the English content to the agency. The agency will type it all out in Japanese and they'll send it back. So what we build instead is a software system that connects to where the content is housed. So for the website, that might be a system like WordPress. So you connect to WordPress, you pull the English documents out of it. It goes through our translation system, which is a human in the loop system. So what it kind of looks like when a translator is using it is it has this predictive typing interface. So a translator, you can imagine they're reading the English that's been pulled out of WordPress, they're typing in Japanese, and the system is predicting words and phrases based on the English and the partial Japanese translation that they've typed, and is accelerating the work that they do. So we can make it faster and higher quality. And by doing that, we can also make it more cost efficient. So the translator translates the document and then it's pushed back directly into WordPress for publication on the website. Okay,
cool. Yeah, because I wasn't sure if you were building more of just an alternative to Google Translate, but it's more of an add-on, as in it's doing different service exactly. You're not just building a translation engine exactly.
That's right. Yeah. There are two issues with just kind of building a public a general purpose machine translation system. The first is the tech companies give that away for free for the most part. And so there's not really a business there. But the second is that those products are really built for consumer settings. So going to the website and translating a few sentences, or the mobile app, you can kind of walk around and you can speak into it and order something at a Chinese restaurant. Or the Google Translate app has this cool thing now where you can hold your phone up in the video up to like a road sign and it'll translate the thing for you, which is really neat. But that's not the type of system that a business needs when they need a quality guarantee to translate their website that customers are going to see.
So yeah, it was quite interesting. Thanks for that. You spoke about the problems with just building a normal translation service, but the service you've done, I'm guessing you've had quite a lot of problems with as well. Could you maybe allude to some of the biggest problems that you've had in building the company?
In building the company or building the product, or both?
Both. Maybe one than the other, because it's completely different things, but both are quite interesting.
Okay. As far as building the company, I think that there are a different set of challenges in each phase, and you solve one set of problems, and then if the company doesn't die, then you get served with a higher class set of problems, which is a good thing, I guess. But I think in the early days, the really hard part was to assemble the initial team. It's a complicated technology to build that requires, in the early days, we needed PhD level people to build the system. And there are not that many of those people in the world. And most of them work for the tech companies for very large salaries. And so we had to convince a small group of people to come work from a 3-person startup for not much money, to when they could be off, drinking coffee at Google or something like that. That was quite difficult to take what's already a small pool of people that can work on a problem and then find the just couple of people in that community who would be willing, who had the risk profile to take on a startup. So that was the first almost year of the company, was getting the product to work.
You explained what the big problem was, but you didn't explain how you solved it. So how did you convince some PhD people that they should come work for a startup and take bigger risks and have less money than doing something really nice and easy?
I'm not sure that I have a succinct answer to that question. It's more, I guess it's less my persuasive ability and more how interesting the problem is. I think it's less my ability to sell or persuade and more how interesting and important the problem and the mission is. And good scientists and engineers are attracted to hard problems. So if you have hard problems to solve, that's probably the best thing that you can do to attract great people.
Awesome. I'm so glad I asked that question. That was really handy. Okay, you can go back to talking about the other problem with building the product. But
yeah, so getting the product to work, that took about a year. And then you got to get people to pay you money, which is a wholly different problem, and one that we are still working on and solving. And we went through several different go-to-market strategies, even though this is the hard thing for a more analytically minded person to understand, is that John and I have been building the same thing for 10 years, but how we talk about it and how it's kind of packaged up is totally different now than it was even a year ago. And how you message and market things matters an awful lot, especially when you're selling to businesses. And so that has been the process for the last couple of years, is positioning the product in the market so it solves a specific business need. It's presented in a way that people can understand and can compare to what their existing solutions to the problem. It's priced in a way that people understand and they can get through their procurement departments. The sales process is tested well enough and documented well enough that you can start to teach it to more than one salesperson, and you can start to repeatably build a sales organization. These sorts of problems, which before starting a business, I didn't really know that these, I didn't know these problems existed, but I've thought a lot recently of if there's a better way to learn how to run a company than running a company. I'm not sure that there is, but boy, would it save a lot of pain if there was.
Yeah, it's like if you can do a bit of internships in sort of different levels of startups, just to see what the different problems they're already having, and you can kind of anticipate them. Otherwise, you really have to actually have the problem in front of you to be working on it for it to go in, because it doesn't matter how many times you tell a young entrepreneur problems they're going to face, it just doesn't sink into their brain until they actually go, oh shit, I've got to sort out hiring people and actually giving them a useful intro to the company and all the different things that happen that just surprise you and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. And I've had the same experience with reading business books. If I read the book and I haven't had the experience with what it's talking about, I find that I just kind of don't
Yeah.
get it. And then if
Yeah.
I
If it, if
go
it's
back
like
and
pop comes up
reread,
maybe a month later, I'll be like, oh, this is that thing. But if it
yeah,
doesn't come up, like I'll just sort of forget about it, and
yeah,
like it just has to happen like later. So it's really important. It's like the right book at the right time, because you can read a book about like getting funding and stuff. If you're not trying to get funding, you're just kind of wasting your time learning about term sheets and all this jazz. It's just stuff that goes in, and you need to read it again at the right time.
that's right. That's exactly right. And that's exactly been my experience.
Yeah, it's just a pity that, well, yeah, if you guess like maybe more useful is something that just someone that tells you that has been through it all, but could just tell you the right information at the right time. So like a good mentor and like someone that can recommend the right books for you, because otherwise you kind of, yeah, you'll be reading, the wrong book.
Yeah, I think good mentors is really important. And I've been blessed to have a couple of those because a lot of this stuff is experiential, as you know, and it can be just, I don't know about you, but I take comfort in knowing that my human experience is not unique. And the problem that I'm facing, other people have faced and solved. And oftentimes, if you have a good mentor, if you're surrounded by people who have seen more of the film than you have, then you can focus on solving original problems and not resolving problems that other people have already solved and actually aren't that interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely, you can tie yourself in knots doing things that like have already been done. And it's really, that's good advice. Thanks. Then how did you guys get funding to grow the business? Because it seems like you had to do quite a lot of work up front. So if so, how can you explain that process a bit?
Sure. My advisor in grad school had started a company, or not really co-founded it. Anyway, it came out of our research group a couple of years ago. And that's pretty common. I don't know how common it is in other parts of the world, but in the Bay Area, a lot of faculty members, especially in computer science, sort of dabble in startups. Things will kind of come out of their research lab and they'll start a company and then they'll go back and then they'll go start another company and they'll go back. And so my advisor had done that. And a couple of years before I graduated, he gave me a lot of really great life advice. Not only is he a brilliant scientist, but he's a wise person. And a couple of years before I was finishing, he said, what you're working on is pretty applied. Maybe you ought to think about what you do with it when you finish. And so you should go talk to so-and-so who, invested in my company, and maybe he can give you some advice. So I did. And it just so happened at that time that this particular investor was starting to look at machine learning companies. So this was like 2013, late 2012. And some of these companies were just starting to come on the market. And he wanted somebody who could do diligence. So just sit in pitches and listen to what these people were pitching. And they were bad. Like most of them were really bad. And so the barter was, I'd sit in pitches and listen to people pitch companies. And then he would help me, he and the other partners would kind of help me evaluate what I was working on in grad school and like whether it was fundable. And I learned what's the difference between a venture backable business and, a lifestyle business. It's kind of a pejorative term, but like, how do you think about when to raise venture capital and when you don't? We worked on this for about 2 years trying to convince ourselves whether it was a good idea or not. And we ultimately decided that it was a good idea, but that it was a market that had some characteristics that were unfavorable. And so we decided to take a more incremental approach to building the business, which was trying to limit the amount of funding we were raising so that we didn't set ourselves up for growth expectations that might not be realized, given the complexity of the product and how long it might take to build it, and how it wasn't quite clear if we had market timing quite right, like if the technology was mature enough to really make progress in the market. And I think that was really good advice. I think if we had gone out and raised $10 million and hired 50 people, I'm sure we would have run out of money by now. And so you can raise too much money, I guess is what I'm saying. In our particular case, I actually think we ended up raising too little money, because when we started the company, we had a bottom-up sort of B2C type go-to-market strategy, and we ended up being an enterprise company. And like building the infrastructure to serve enterprises is expensive. You got to have salespeople and customer success and support. Like enterprises expect a certain level of support and sophistication that just costs money. And we didn't raise enough money for that, but we didn't know that that's eventually where the business would end up.
Yeah, it's hard to predict these things. Okay, so the actual conversations of getting investors to invest then wasn't so difficult once you'd kind of already nailed your pitch from seeing so many other people and kind of waiting for the right time.
Well, raising money is always difficult. I think that if you want to raise money from good investors, so I think that's often an overlooked point. If you want to raise money on good terms from really good investors who are going to be good long-term partners, that is always going to be hard. And we have been really blessed to have, you'll hear entrepreneurs say things about their board and whether their investors are useful or not. And I've had people ask me, is your board useful? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, these people have had such an enormous impact on our company's development, on my personal development as a business person and as business leader. And so raising money from those caliber of people is very, very difficult because they're looking at lots of companies and they can kind of pick anyone they want. And for them, it's a 7 to 10 year commitment to spend time with a company, and to sign somebody up who's really good to do that is really hard. And I think you should aim for that. If you're going to try to build a big business, you should try to get the smartest people involved in the business as early as you can.
Yeah, definitely. It's an awkward one when you kind of, maybe have to sort of turn people away or kind of wait a few extra months and you can never actually see that person coming. But sometimes you just have to hold on. It can be harder. Okay, so you spoke about how they helped you a lot develop. How do you think you've developed and changed your mindsets and become a better CEO?
Well, it's still very much a work in progress. I think I've gotten better at some things. I think what's always in the top of my mind is what I'm really bad at and what I'm trying to improve on. So maybe I can say a few things that I've gotten better at and what I'm struggling with right now and trying to get better at. Somebody told me a long time ago that a CEO has 3 responsibilities: people, culture, and vision, and not running out of cash. And those are kind of the unique things that a CEO can do. And I think the people and culture part, that has a lot to do with being able to hire well and then being able to articulate expectations for how you want to mobilize a group of people to work together. And a lot of that is being a very good communicator. And when we started the company, I have always, because I like to read, I write pretty well, but I don't speak very well. And I've had to get a lot better at communicating with people. And I think I've gotten a lot better at that, but I'm still, clarity of communication in business is so important, and expectation setting. And that's something that I know I've gotten a lot better at. I don't think you can ever be perfect at it, but I think
you can always improve from what you were yesterday kind of thing. And I have the exact same problem as naturally, I'm comfortable writing, but my speaking abilities were always really poor, which is part of the reason of doing the podcast. It's just like a forcing function to just get much better at it.
But that's interesting.
You can, I mean, when I first started, I couldn't introduce the episodes and I'll do a breakdown afterwards, but I couldn't even leave an answer phone message just because I could mess it up. I just couldn't think words fast enough to say them. And it was just so I've definitely come on a lot from doing it, but I've still got things to learn.
And so was that one of your motivations for starting the podcast was to improve your own personal communication?
Actually a bit of a self-development side of the motivation things. And I guess I'd done a bit of journalism at uni where I'd spoken to cool bands and stuff for free. I got to go and watch their gigs, and I got to interview these cool people. It's actually, it's probably pretty easy to just get a hold of people. People like talking about themselves and stuff. So it's
of course,
it's hard to start a podcast this part. Yeah. So it seemed like a good life hack, really, to get involved with people I want to be learning from and learn from them, really. It was handy.
It's funny how just you say is accurate. Everybody loves to talk about themselves, and you can sort of walk around with a microphone in your hand and you'll just be amazed at what you learn and what people will say, right?
Yeah. You can have much better conversations with much more high profile people than you'd ever get to normally. And people that you'd normally try and pay for time with them instead are queuing up to have talks with you. And it's got a bit ridiculous now, but I get so many emails from millionaires trying to be on my podcast. It's a bit oh God, another one. I mean, no offense from you guys, but it's kind of a bit of you have to pinch yourself. Oh wait, a year ago I would have been oh my God. Yeah. Now I'm oh God, I'll try and fit it in a schedule somewhere. Nightmare. But anyway, I've kind of interrupting you on you only really started on the people and culture side of
Yeah. So
things.
the people and culture part, that I think I've gotten a bit better at in articulating like sort of the values of the company and, like really preaching those values and hiring people who are consistent with those values. I think it's really important. And I see this more and more. We switched our hiring process. So I used to be earlier in the hiring process and now I'm deeper in it and I do a mission, vision, values interview. And it's interesting to me how, especially for younger people, because I'm like 37, I'm just like sort of slightly old at this point. But when I'm interviewing people and say they're early to mid 20s, how culture is like the main thing that they ask about. And we early on didn't talk about that as much in our hiring process. And now we talk about it a lot. And it helps a lot to have an opinion and a point of view on that and to communicate that clearly and select for people that are excited about that and not partner with people who aren't. So I think we've done that pretty early in the history of our company, but we could have done it even earlier. The part that is kind of top of mind for me right now that I'm just now learning to get better at is hiring and managing managers. So I think when you get to a certain stage of a company, we're about 40 now, you have to get really good at picking people who are going to be leaders in your company, who are going to be effective people managers, but then are also going to be advocates of the values that you have for the company, because you just can't possibly do everything yourself anymore. And that introduces a whole new set of problems of picking those people, training those people, developing those people, learning how to ask really good questions about what's going on, because you can't talk to everybody in the company anymore. And that is sort of the main thing that I'm working on with my mentors right now, and that I need to get a lot better at.
So do you think it's a good thing to have a company that doesn't scale ultra fast? Like if you'd gone to like $1 billion in like 2 years, you'd maybe sort of be getting ahead of yourself and like all these things you wouldn't have had time to like get good at as a CEO?
I don't know. Startups kind of by definition are built to grow. And I think that, I don't know, what did Eric Schmidt say? Revenue solves all problems. Like it's a great problem to have to be scaling revenue that fast. But I do think it's just, given how hard it's been to pick people and develop people and build an organization that's operationally excellent, even going in the last year, we've gone from 7 people to 40 people. And that's been one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Yeah. And we have somebody in our company who was at Zenefits, which went from like 50 to 2,000 in a year and a half or something like that. And it broke, the company just kind of broke. Yeah,
seems mental.
So maybe there is some rate at which, I don't know what goes past beyond white hot, but like you just kind of like the thing burns itself up.
Yeah, because it's not something I'd really thought about until you were just describing it. And it was like, oh yeah, there are all these things that do just kind of take time to learn. And like, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I like doing things properly. And I think there'd just be so much stuff that I'd be getting wrong all the time if running a company that's growing at that rate kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That either you just need to sort of go, okay, let's hire like a CEO that's run like a 2,000 person business and scale it up, or accept that there's going to be a lot of problems.
I do think second time entrepreneurs have an enormous advantage. Just we talked earlier about experience, but just like your pattern recognizer just works a lot better after you've done it once.
Definitely. Cool. Okay, so what do you think is the future of AI, machine translation and things in 5 years' time? Where do you see the company going and like the general sphere?
Well, I think it's absolutely the case. Our field, like other fields, more of the work will be routine. The work that can be routinized will. And so that workload will move to machines. I'm less of an optimist, I guess, that, the entire field will be fully automated and there's some sort of dystopic future where nobody has a job anymore. I think that's really kind of ahistorical. That's not really the history of technology. Really, the history of technology is you mechanize things that can be mechanized, and that frees people up to work on higher order problems. Maybe that's not true in places like, I don't know, the copy shop in a business, and now you have a printer and you don't need a copy person. That's probably true. But in our field, I think human translators right now spend so much of their time translating stuff that isn't very interesting, like, sort of legal contracts and terms of service and things like that. And the really interesting stuff, like blog content and white papers and things like this just don't usually tend to get translated out of English. And I would think that the stuff that's easier to routinize, more and more of that will just move to being fully automated. And that'll free people up to work on the higher class problems that right now it's too expensive to work on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's not something it's something that I've thought of in terms of SEO is quite a good way is if you've got like a good blog, but maybe it's got a lot of competition in like English. If you can translate it into other languages, there's like often like very little competition for it. It's a good way to
That's exactly right.
rank well, but the cost is a bit of like, is it worth it? But yeah.
So I would hope that precisely that you would be able to, as a company, decide that for a fixed budget, we want to go into these languages and like that is possible. You don't have to, it's not going to cost you $1 million and it's not going to take a year or any of that stuff. So I would like to see multilingual content publishing just be a much easier problem to solve. And I think there's still an awful lot of work to do to make that possible.
Okay. I get too excited just straight away, but yeah, happy to learn more and I'll take a look for sure. I am delighted to tell you about today's sponsor, Orgain's Grants for Greater Good. Orgain are literally giving away $150,000 in grant money. So it's not really like a very salesy pitch, this one. They're here to give you money. You run a business that works in nutrition, mind-body wellness, or promoting healthy lifestyles, then this is for you. So we all know that it's challenging to start a business, and the right support and money can really help you go a long way. And that's where Orgain wants to come in. Just a little bit about Orgain themselves. They are a convenient and clean nutrition company, and it's a brand that was founded by Dr. Andrew Abraham, who originally developed a nutritional shake whilst he was trying to beat cancer that he had in his teens, just to help himself nourish his body. And he realized that his recipe was really useful and he wanted to share that with the world a lot more than being a doctor. So he founded Orgain to make the world healthier. So yeah, Andrew knows from first-hand experience what it's like to change the world one idea at a time, and that these ideas can often struggle to get the financial support to get off the ground. So he wants to pay it forward. Nice guy. Orgain will choose 3 deserving startups and grant them each $50,000 each to help take their business to the next level. To apply for the program, your startup needs to be 2 years or older and in the business of promoting healthy, vibrant lives, either through nutrition, active lifestyles, or mindfulness. So the application period ends on the 20th of March 2020. If you think that your business is a good fit, please visit orgain.com/grants to learn more. That's orgain.com/grants. Okay, then your general feelings of things not getting automated straight away. So you're saying, as an AI expert, that we shouldn't be too scared about AI or anything just yet?
Well, I don't think that the machine learning systems that are built right now are very good at mimicking certain human behaviors, sort of like object recognition or labeling words and sentences and deciding whether a sentence is positive or negative, things like that. I don't think that anybody really has an operationalizable definition of what intelligence is and how common sense reasoning works with world knowledge. And so I don't think that there are any serious researchers right now who think that or like working on operationalizing intelligence or think that that's anywhere on the horizon. You see a lot of progress in specific tasks, building specific systems for translation, for computer vision, for speech. But it's very difficult to build, and nobody's really building systems that can do all of those things at the same time, like our brain can do them. And it's not really known how to do that. So I think that it's not something that anybody serious really thinks is anywhere on the horizon.
Yeah. Have you read much like Ray Kurzweil and things like that? It's very ambitious, that guy. It's like, ooh, easy tiger.
Yeah, I don't find it very compelling, but
yeah. I mean, there are a few guys that do seem to be coming from a bit of an expert opinion, but most blogs and things that you read about like AI going crazy from people that actually don't know much about it. They're just going a bit like, oh, in Fairyland, if we can do this, it'll be so scary, which is true. But then about like Fairyland, so it's not right.
Yeah.
Anyway, cool. Then on to one of my favorite things. You mentioned books as a thing. And I always like to ask people about books. What would you say has been the most important books for you? And actually, just related to what we just spoke about, have you got any books specifically in AI firstly, and then?
Well, I'm reading a couple textbooks right now. One unfortunate consequence of my job is that I don't get to spend as much time on technology as I used to, and I don't get to run experiments and build systems. So I'm reading that just to keep up with, like, deep learning and machine learning is moving really quickly right now. So I'm reading some textbooks to just try to stay not stupid. And so I don't really read popular science AI books. I'm reading some textbooks and some papers and stuff like that right now.
So what would you say would be the best sort of textbook to get an introduction to AI?
Well, for our field, which is natural language processing, there's a book that just came out, a lovely book that just came out in January, I think, by Eugene Charniak, who he's like 73 or 74. I think he's kind of a pioneer in our field. And he was a deep learning skeptic, a neural network skeptic for a long time. And then it's finally these systems actually work. And of course, there have been multiple waves of neural networks since the 50s. And so he's old enough to where he's seen multiple of those. And so he finally decided, like, I've got to learn this. So he, as a good academic would do, he decided he was going to teach a course on it. And so this book is him, a 73-year-old, like, works through teaching himself neural networks. And it's out by MIT Press. It's like 25 chapters or something. And it's a really good introduction to building language systems that pretty much anybody who knows how to program can follow. So I've read that recently. That's really good. Ian Goodfellow's textbook on deep learning is really good. You should read that if you haven't. And so those are two that I've been, like, sort of working through in various phases recently.
Okay, yeah, that's probably enough for now anyway. Good. Okay, and then in terms of general business books, you said you've read quite a few. What do you think were the ones that really helped you the most?
So the ones that helped me the most were, probably the top one is a short book. It's less than 100 pages, called The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. And the key idea in that book is that a manager, as a individual contributor, you go from assessing your own performance in terms of your individual output to being an organization leader, and your performance is the output of your organization. And it seems obvious, but that's a switch that kind of has to flip in your head and is really difficult and subtle to get right, because you have a reflex. If you're a strong doer of things, you have a reflex to, like, go fix things. And when you become an organization leader, you've got to learn how to manage through people to get things done. And that's, as I said, that's still something that I'm trying to get a lot better at, because my reflex is like, oh, I'll just go do that. And that's neither efficient nor good nor actually healthy for an organization. So that book helped me a lot. And then there's a longer book by Drucker called Management. It was written in the mid 70s and then revised in the 90s. It's like 800 pages or something. And that's kind of like my reference manual. It's got, like, everything in there. And then I think probably my management hero, if you will, is, like, for a lot of people, is Andy Grove. And so I've read pretty much everything he wrote, and his ideas still resonate so strongly. And so we use OKRs religiously and one-on-ones and things like that.
Yeah. Have you read much Patrick Lencioni? It's also been a good one, I found.
Yeah, I think, you can sort of read 5 dysfunctions of a team. You can sort of put that one down pretty quickly.
Yeah, all of his are quite short.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm starting to have a bit more, like, once you become like a scientist, you kind of stop you'll read a blog about something and think, oh, wait, this isn't science. This is so stupid. I kind of feel that way a bit about, like, parables now, because I'm like, well, I'll often have a conversation in my head with someone hypothetically, and then, like, I'll say one word, and then, like, the entire rest of the conversation will be completely different in a meeting. And so you read a parable about how to have good meetings, and someone will, like, say something to Jan, and then Jan would actually probably just, like, be fine with it and wouldn't be like, oh, fuck you, whatever that comes up in this parable. So I'm like, I'm basically just reading a good piece of fiction, but yeah, sometimes they have good principles. Anyway, bit of a tangent there. Yeah, okay. So the last few questions, I guess. What's the kindest thing that anyone has ever done for you?
The kindest thing anyone's ever done for me? I've never been asked that question before. Well, this is just the thing that popped into my head because it's that season. But I guess, my faith is pretty important to me, and it's Easter season. So I think that's maybe something that I would think of as, I guess that's on my mind a lot right now.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So I hadn't realized that you were religious. I guess the assumption usually is that someone doing like tech and stuff isn't such a religious person. Yeah. Wow. Have you found that difficult? There's like the Silicon Valley episode about the guy where he sort of admits to being religious, and then everyone's like, whoa. Did you find it? Because I've never been there. I don't know if that's really a thing or not. Because some of their stuff's really like on point, but I have no idea about that.
That show is kind of painful to watch. I don't watch it. It kind of makes me laugh and cry at the same time. So it's kind of stressful for me to watch. But yeah. No, I think it's generally like people are really open to ideas here. So I think it's not really a problem or a thing.
Cool. It's good to hear.
Yeah.
Definitely in for allowing people. I got quite into did the Vipassana meditation retreat last year, and
did you?
That side of things, and like Buddhism and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice. It's really, really cool. Okay, so what would you say is one of your earliest, like, vivid memories? For another oddball question.
The house that I grew up in, there was a train behind it. And I remember I must have been like 2 or 3 or something. The circus came to town, and there was a circus train with like elephants and giraffes and all this kind of stuff that went by behind the back of the house. And I remember standing in the backyard and watching the circus train go by. And when I was young, I wanted to be an engineer because I loved this train. I would beg my mom to go in the backyard and let me watch the train go by on the tracks. And so I'm embarrassed to say, until I was about midway through high school, I thought an engineer was somebody who drove a train. And then I kind of learned that is one type of engineer, but there's this other type of engineer. And I guess that I ended up becoming the second type of engineer. Yeah, but it would still be cool to drive a train, I think.
Yeah, definitely. My great-grandpa was a train driver.
Oh, really?
In fact. Yeah, but it's really cool, like the sort of the things that you don't realize are true, or you just have a completely wrong conception of as a child, just can get told something.
Yeah.
Yeah, like those things. Okay. So yeah, I guess we're kind of, running out of time really. So is there anything else that you did want to talk about that we haven't spoken about?
No, I think we've covered quite a lot of territory. So thanks for the nice conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for making time, and my apologies for giving you 5 minutes of my face silently at the start. Have you got any questions you want to ask me quickly?
No, I think I'm grateful for the time, and I think I've got to get on to my next meeting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks so much for giving me some insights into things. It was really fascinating. Seems like you've done a lot of good lessons, and keen to see where it goes. And yeah, I'm certainly keen to sort of try doing a bit more translating of my stuff as well. We'll see if I have time. I might actually get into reading some of the deep learning textbooks. That's always been something I want to do, because I'm a coder, but don't spend as much time doing it as I'd like to. So we'll see. That'd be nice.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, man. Take it easy.
You too.
Congratulations on listening to a whole episode of the Growth Mindset podcast. Before you race into another podcast, try pausing. Ask yourself, what have you learned? What could you change? How will you make that change happen? Did you press pause? Knowledge is useless without action. What did you learn? What should you change? And how will you make that change happen? You can tell us what you learned by contacting us through the website, growthmindsetpodcast.com, and feel free to connect with us or our guests, or just peruse the show notes. Our Instagram is @growthmindsetpodcast, or follow me @samjamsnaps for a daily reminder to stop using Instagram. If you enjoy random acts of kindness and want to support the show, you can support us on Patreon or leave us a review on iTunes, and you'll make me very happy. And with that, keep learning and keep growing.